All right, I think we can get started. Again, hello everyone. My name is Vlad Kavalewski, and I'm a program manager at the Global Disaster Preparedness Center, which is a Red Cross Red Crescent Reference Center hosted by American Red Cross and I4C. And I'm really excited to welcome you all at our fourth and last webinar in the series focused on reaching the last mile, early warning systems. And today we're going to focus on presentations from three researchers that kind of focused on different design choices, coordination, and other enabling factors to ensure that early warnings actually lead to early action. And just a few kind of housekeeping notes before we begin. The webinar is recorded, so we do it so we can share, the recording and summary of the webinar with you afterwards. So a couple of days after the webinar, stay tuned for a follow-up email in your inbox with kind of key summary of the webinar. And then we'll have our three speakers present, and then we'll take questions and Q&A and discussion afterwards, after all three presentations. So kind of, jot down, remember your questions, or you can also use the Q&A feature in the webinar to drop your question there. So, and then after all three presentations, we'll go back and take those questions. So again, either remember them, and then you'll have a chance to unmute and ask your questions, or if you prefer just to write your question, just post them in the Q&A feature. And as I said, kind of the focus of our series was on sharing the evidence and kind of findings from the research that GDPC supported across 15 countries. And the research really focused on what makes early warning systems more effective and more inclusive for so-called last mile communities. And by last mile communities, we mean those groups and communities that are hardest to reach, that are socially marginalized or geographically remote, and that are typically kind of the last to benefit from various, formal services and systems. Again, the research that we supported spanned 5 different continents, many countries, focused on many different types of last mile communities. And if you're interested to explore the specific projects that came out of this research, just either scan the QR code, or later I'll drop link in the chat where you can access all 15 research reports that came out of this program. And again, the kind of and as I mentioned, it was a series of webinars, and today is unfortunately our last webinar. But if you missed some of the previous sessions, you can on our website we posted like a very detailed summary and recap of every event. So feel free to scan the QR code to access those recap documents and the recordings. And also, on top of the research that we supported, we also produced kind of a meta-synthesis analysis of all the research projects. So we looked at, lessons and kind of insights and findings that came out from individual project, and we compiled and synthesized it in the report that looks at the question of like, how can we make, early warning systems more inclusive and more effective for those hardest to reach communities. You can access the report by scanning the QR code, or I'm also gonna post link in the chat later on. At the report, we look at the findings across all 4 pillars of early warnings, and maybe the findings and recommendations may not be new or something like so unfamiliar to people working in the early warning early action space. But I think it just kind of emphasizes that lesson learned is not necessarily the same as lesson practice. So a lot of the things that we do know that are important for inclusivity of early warning systems, they're not being applied in practice. And when you look at early warning system in the community at the community level, a lot of those challenges still exist despite being well known and kind of well documented in the research and literature. And and kind of the bottom line of our of all the research projects and our meta synthesis report and this webinar series is that a lot of the challenges that early warnings are facing are not necessarily technical. It's not all about technology or kind of infrastructure or monitoring infrastructure, forecasting metastructure. A lot of the challenges, they're social and institutional, and comes down to collaboration between different stakeholders and levels of governments, about community participation, about trust and resources that people have or may not have to actually act on early warnings. Again, if you're interested to explore our meta synthesis report, scan the QR code or follow this link and you'll find it on our website. And today in our fourth and last session, we kind of focus on the central question that we're focusing on is what design choices and partnerships and conditions actually help close the gap between message received and message acted upon. Because if warning does not produce action, it's essentially a warning failed. And the research projects that we'll discuss today, they kind of focus on those enabling conditions that determine whether communities actually act on early warning systems, and also different kind of conditions and kind of design choices that help ensure that warnings are received, and not only received but also acted upon. And we'll have three amazing speakers from Africa, kind of focusing on different, again, context and different hazards, from extreme heat to floods, and kind of different types of communities, from urban informal settlement residents to kind of remote rural residents. And we'll have three amazing speakers. We'll have Alamuyiwa Adegan from Federal University of Technology, Akure in Nigeria, who studied kind of informal settlements, dwellers in Nigerian cities, and their access to extreme heat early warnings. Then we'll have Linda Obiero from University in Nairobi, in Kenya, who focused on kind of flood-related early warnings. And then we'll have Charles Chunga from Mzuzu University in Malawi. And as I said, as you listen to speakers, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A feature, and then we'll go back and respond to your questions. And as I said, unfortunately, it's our last session in the series. But if you're interested, if you missed and interested to kind of learn what was discussed in previous sessions, I'm going to post a link in the chat to the webpage where you can access kind of summaries from previous webinars. Again, thank you for being with us today, and hopefully it'll be an interesting and insightful session for you. And without further ado, I want to pass it over to Alamuyiwa for his presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I just want to be sure you are all hearing me. Vlad, can you confirm that?
Yeah, we're hearing you and we're seeing your presentation.
Good. Okay, so thanks for the background, and let me start with a note of acknowledgement to the Red Cross Red Crescent organization who supported our work, I think about 2 years ago, for the research looking at last mile communities. And for our project, we looked at heat warnings in informal settlements considering two cities in Nigeria. So I did not do the work alone. I did it in collaboration with my colleagues, Toby Morakinyo, who is now based at Texas A&M. He's on the call and listening, and with Peter Elias, based at the University of Lagos. For context, it's important to show uh, what conditions slums have. So we just to give a context of informal settlements. Uh, in Africa, in most developing countries, you find significant number of the urban population living in areas characterized or categorized as slums or informal settlements, usually at-risk locations, areas not normally suitable for residential development, and the people living in these areas are usually disadvantaged socioeconomically, and they do face critical risk from extreme temperature, considering the quality of housing, access to services, considering the income levels, and a couple of other factors. So informal settlements are actually at the hotspots of climate risk, especially in cities. Like Vlad gave in the background, they also constitute a last mile, considering the level of marginalization and the deprivation in cities. So they fit in the context of last mile in African countries and beyond. So in order to address the exposure to extreme temperatures within informal settlements, early warning systems hold the potential. And this is the basis for what we did, because when you invest in early warning systems, you cut the disaster impacts, the damages that could have come to disasters by a significant proportion. So we had our projects in two parts. First, to assess the level of utilization of early warning resources within the communities that we selected, and then to deploy uh, sorry, I'm just having an issue with the slide, but it's fine. So we wanted to deploy an existing its early warning system to pilot it and draw some lessons from this. So in the first part, we had two methods. First, a focus group discussion with diverse groups of residents in Akure and in Lagos. We worked in those two cities, in informal areas within the two cities, selected informal areas. So we had a focus group discussion with residents based on groupings, groups of gender, groups of employment, of their livelihoods, and other characteristics to check on their awareness about existing weather information. And existing weather information includes information about heat. Maybe not deliberately framed as early warning systems, but the Nigerian Meteorological Agency and a couple of other meteorological agencies do release information about it. We wanted to see how people in these areas are whether they are aware or they've interacted with some of this information. So after the focus group discussion, we had the survey in order to check some of the issues we earlier engaged through the focus group discussion. And we had the sample size of 364 residents in Akure and 272 residents in Lagos. So the survey also helped us to harvest phone contacts, because in the second part, we wanted to deploy this heat warning system. So we wanted volunteer residents to sign up to the system we're going to deploy after the survey. So in the second part, where we developed and deployed the heat warning information, we first did the data processing. So we got next day maximum temperature data from the meteorological agency. We used both the UK Met information from the UK Met and the Nigerian Meteorological Agency. So we got information about temperature and about relative humidity and we used it to develop our humidex model in order to understand the heat index for the following day. So we now disseminated the heat index information through SMS as alerts to everyone who has signed up across the two communities. So we used the bulk SMS systems for and did this for like 39 days using English and the local language. We were able to reach about 175 residents in Lagos and then 151 residents in Akure through the SMS system. So this just showed the classification of the humidex and heat risk conditions that we used in sending the messages. So when we get the temperature information for the next day and the humidity, and we got the humidex, we classify it in that there's no risk, it's very warm or it's hot, and then we share this information with the residents and what they need to do to cope with the heat. So just to run through our findings, we found that knowledge of heat warning system is low based on our first study of checking how people know about heat. And we also investigated factors that influence their awareness. So understanding language, some even feel the information is not available, and the mode of technology, where, for example, information is shared through TVs and many of them don't have TVs, or shared through medium that can only be received through smartphones. They don't have smartphones or they don't even have phones at all, and the frequency. So we got these factors to understand how people better understand the information. So we also checked if they've taken any specific actions based on information they've gotten. I mean, this was before deploying our system, piloting our system, I would say. What we found is that most have not developed any kind of the greater percentage have not taken any specific action. Some have, but the most have not, as you can see from the figure from the chart here, and that no as the highest percentage. So we also asked, why have they not taken these actions? Some link this to accuracy of the forecast. They think, well, how can you know about the weather tomorrow? How accurate? You say it's going to rain, it didn't rain. Some even feel, oh, it's only God that knows what will happen tomorrow. So you find people who don't believe the forecasts are accurate, and then they really don't take any actions or take the wrong actions based on even when forecasts have been disseminated. You also find people who get the information, the weather information, but because they had to make ends meet, they had to just go ahead with what they need to do. So in between the choice of your livelihood and your health, for example, working in the sun, and this applies most to outdoor workers, in between working outdoor and then the health impacts of heat, they feel it's better to just go and work and make money. Some even said the heat of the pocket is more than the heat of the sun. So if you have heat would refer to lack in your pocket, it's much more of a problem than working in the sun. So this just gives us some context on why some of the existing information have not been acted on by the residents. So we checked the dissemination preferences for the early warning information. The highest was through radio, through SMS, and in person. Some even preferred posters and a couple of other media like that. We looked at what influenced these preferences. We found that age was a significant factor. Younger people preferred more visual, more digitally related media, while the older people preferred more visual related media and then use of radio. Educational level also affected this because those with higher level of education preferred things like XMS, while those with lower level of education preferred telephone or media release and things like that. Okay, so we also checked the groups to be targeted in the dissemination because we had created an anticipation for what we're going to deploy. And this just gives us an idea of the groups to be focused on, especially vulnerable groups, from outdoor workers, women, the physically challenged, parents of infants, the elderly, those taking medications and things like that. Okay, so after we had deployed the each warning for those days, we now add a session or through focus group discussion, a community meeting and interviews to get feedback on those who had received the alert. We call it the each alert SMS, which we shared with over 100 residents across both places. And one thing was clear was that the message was received, was well received by many. They got the SMS. Some did not get the SMS because those who had activated the do not disturb mode on their phones cannot get bulk SMS. So not all we disseminated to got it, but most acknowledged that they got it. And those who got this, who did not understand what the message is, sought clarification from those who they think knows more. So I wouldn't be reading some of these comments from the discussants and the residents. But we spotted the issue of alert fatigue. It wasn't prominent, but I think from one or two the discussants, they felt tired of getting the same information every night about tomorrow, particularly when the humidex level it's the same, maybe over 7 days, over 10 days, you have the same level of heat risk. So you get the same information. Maybe you're even tired, you don't want to open it again. So we spotted the issue of alert fatigue, and then we noted it could be a possibility. It's something to be considered in this kind of dissemination. So many shared their experiences or the testimonies of change based on their actions on the information they got. So many those who confirmed to us explain how they change the way they hydrate, their dressing, the daily activities, what they eat, and all that in order to be able to cope with the heat based on the information they got the previous day. And based on these activities, some even noted improvements in their health. Let me just read this comment. My work is quite strenuous. It makes me stay under the sun. Sorry, just a moment. Makes me stay under the sun for long hours. But since I started using guidelines provided through the messages, like taking showers, drinking lots of water, I realized there have been tremendous changes. So this is just one of those who claimed this was very useful. Then they also shared suggestions on how we can improve dissemination using other channels like radio, because we did not use the radio, we only the SMS. And sorry, I forgot to mention, we also pasted posters within the community so that those who did not receive SMS could also see some of the posters we pasted, and then they could get information about the each warning for and corresponding actions, early actions that needed to be taken. So we also had the suggestion on the need to have community sensitization events about heat, to expand the languages used. For most of the communities, we use the local languages, but we feel, okay, not everybody 100% would even understand those languages. Some might understand some other languages outside the community, and then it's better to use as much languages as possible. And of course, to reach more people beyond the communities. So lessons we learned, be it early warning was well received, but we spotted the need for bottom-up innovation. So it has to be more co-productive to see how can we better disseminate forecasting and forecast information within the community. How can residents themselves share this information beyond just the bottom-up from the meteorological information to the community, and the other way around or both ways. So which also brings this idea of the hybrid system. How can the community take a more active role in disseminating the information? We saw the need for digitization since the system we used was manual. We had to check the information every day. You dare not forget. I think we had to set reminders in order to just capture that for those days. But with digitization could make this automated and make it a lot easier. Language factor was also very critical because these are marginalized communities. You have people who, for example, don't understand English, or the understanding of English is limited. They understand the vernacular or some terminologies used in the vernacular could be, they want it used, some words used, not just the regular language. Uh, Another key issue was the need to provide basic services because yes, the people got information, but in the absence of basic services and infrastructure, it's difficult to build resilience. So people need water, people need electricity, and these are very important to support some of the early actions needed, like hydration, like bathing, and maybe use of cooling devices that could be afforded within the community. So to close, just to say, we've published this work in an article. I encourage you to take a look and get more information. And just to say, this experience shows to us the potentials of what could make early warning work in last mile communities like slums. And we look forward to taking this work further. And I look forward to your comments and feedback. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much, Omoiwa. Very interested study and paper that came out of the study. And I actually just dropped the link in the chat to your paper. So if anyone is interested to read the research in full, just follow the link in the chat. And next, I would like to invite Linda Obiero from University of Nairobi, who will share about her research on flood early warning systems for communities living kind of in proximity to Lake Victoria in Kenya. Linda, the floor is yours. And I'm gonna share your presentation.
I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we'll hear you. And see you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying thank you for inviting me to share my findings on this webinar. And I'm going to share the research that we did on why early warnings fail at the last mile. So specifically what the study looked at was the barriers to inclusive flood early warning systems in a last mile community called Kolwa East in Kisumu County, and that is Kenya. So I did this work with my other colleagues called Lydia and Jen. Next slide, please. So onto the introduction, we realized that climate change has increased the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events globally. So Kenya is no exception to this, and Kenya has continued to experience flood disasters, which has resulted in loss of lives, livelihoods, displacement, as well as damage to infrastructure. So even at the time that we did this study, there was a delay in our study because the floods went on for longer than it was anticipated, and we had to push back. So the photo that you're seeing, that is where the office of the county administrator is. And initially, this is where we used to hold our meetings. But at the time when we wanted to go and have this research to start our interviews, we found that the office had been flooded. And this is because this area is quite vulnerable to floods due to the location. The terrain is a bit flat. And then also you find that the poverty levels are quite high. So you find that this is a community which keeps struggling. Next slide. So what made us undertake this study? And it is because of the fact that we recognize the importance of early warning system, that when it is working, you find that it is going to help in the reduction of disasters. But the interesting thing is that despite the significant investments that Kenya has made in forecasting and weather monitoring, we find that there's a challenge that still remains when it comes to translating this forecast into actionable information, especially at the community level. Because when we have these forecasts, but the community are not able to act on them, then we say that the forecasts are not helping, because we expect it to translate into actionable action, and it should be timely. So that was the problem that we found when we went to this area. So for the research questions, what the study sought to do is we wanted to find out what are the barriers that prevent the communities from accessing these flood early warning messages, and then which factors affect the comprehension and inclusivity of these early warnings, and then lastly, what are the effects of the floods on the community. So for the methods that we used a mixed methods approach, whereby we tried to get some quantitative data through remote sensing and GIS, and then we also did qualitative we also use qualitative methods where we had interviews, we had focus group discussions with the community, as well as key informant interviews. So onto the results that we found, starting with the analysis that we did from the remote sensing and GIS, where we looked at data from 2018 to 2024. It was quite interesting. We discovered that flooding has consistently become more extensive during the March, April, May rainy season, and than during the October, November, December season. So even we found that now the communities had experienced more incidents of flooding during the March, April, and May seasons. Then the year 2023 is where this community experienced the most severe flooding, and approximately about 631 hectares were submerged during the long rains. So these findings just supported what we found in literature, that flooding has become more frequent and severe, and therefore emphasizing the need for effective flood early warning systems. Then onto the findings that we found now from the key informant interviews, the focus group discussions, and that we did. We've number one, we wanted to find out are communities aware of these climate risks, because if a community is not aware, then it means that they're not going to be able to take action. So from our findings, we were able to establish that these communities were aware of the climate risks that they face, and they cited flooding. That is what they face about 3 times a year, which causes them to be displaced from their homes. Then we also found that these floods had they had far-reaching impacts when it comes to the damage onto the property, because when these floods happen, these communities normally build semi-permanent houses, so they're made of mud. So you find that when the floods occur, then the whole house is the whole housing structure is destroyed. So after the waters have subsided, they have to come back and build again their houses. We found that there was now incidents of food insecurity because the farms have been washed away. When it comes to livelihood losses, they are not able to continue their day-to-day livelihoods like fishing, because the fish has been swept away to downstream. So the downstream communities were experiencing high levels of fish stock, but it was just for a limited period. And then displacement was another issue, whereby they were forced to move out of their homes. And then we also have the psychosocial stress that this community were facing. And the psychosocial stress comes because now they've lost everything. So they're not able to provide for their families. There's also that aspect of cultural disruption, whereby in this community, mother-in-law, father-in-law are not supposed to live in the same place. But now you find that when flooding occurs, they all have to go and relocate to the evacuation center. So this was quite a problem to them. So you find that men sometimes opted to stay behind. And then there's also that incident of gender-based violence, because the men now are feeling so frustrated they're not able to provide for their families. On the findings of early warning awareness, we found that these communities actually receive this early warning information from institutions such as the Kenya Meteorological Department, which is in charge of forecasting in Kenya. Then we have Red Cross, and then we also have some agricultural platforms whereby farmers are able, the farmers who are registered on these agricultural platforms are able to get information about extended period of rainfall and all that. So they're able to get some of this information. Then we also wanted to find out from the community, because this flooding is a frequent occurrence. So what can they do? Are they willing to be involved in the management of flood? And the community informed us that they were willing to participate in disaster management, but the problem was that they were not involved when it comes to the designing of these early warning systems. So for them, the information was just flowing top to bottom, but they were not being involved. Yet they also have their indigenous ways of knowing that they're going to experience floods, because if they see certain trees flowering, or if some elders start feeling cold, then they're able to tell that they're going to be experiencing floods soon. But unfortunately, they were excluded from this process. And then also the local government relied on the climate change committees who are in place, because this climate change committee has an established structure. So they decided to use the same committees also to disseminate any flood early warning. But now the problem was that these climate change committees were not actually getting to the people. So there was a bit of disconnect in the way that this information was being relayed by the climate change committees. So then we also wanted to find out about the marginalized and the vulnerable groups. How were they being affected because of not being able to receive this information on time? And we found out that these vulnerable groups now, which include the people living with disabilities, the older people, the widows, or the illiterate members of community, they are often excluded from these messages because number one, primarily these early warning messages are sent through the SMS, the short media message on the phone. So you find like the person living with disabilities or the blind, the visually impaired, they have to wait until in the evening when somebody comes back home or their neighbor comes back home for them to be able to read the messages to them. For the illiterate, of course, they're not able to read these messages. So again, they have to rely on their neighbors to read these messages for them. And you find that sometimes when these messages are relayed, they need to take quick action because they also face another phenomenon called they face two kinds of flooding. So there's that flooding that occurs whenever it rains, and then sometimes it never rains in this area, but it still floods because of the backflow from Lake Victoria. And this is because of the rains which happens in the highlands. I'd mentioned that this area is a flat terrain. So you find that these vulnerable members of community are not going to be able to get these messages on time, and therefore they're not able to act. Then you find that also men are forced to stay behind in their flooded homestead, because if they decide to leave their homes and they all go to the evacuation centers, number one, the evacuation centers is not adequate for them. And secondly, there's that fear of theft. So you'll go, and by the time you come back, you find that all your household goods have been stolen. So the women and the children will relocate. The elderly will wait on the other community members to help them to evacuate. And then now the men are going to remain behind. Next slide, please. So to sum up the the categories of the barriers we found, I would say that there's governance and coordination challenges, and that one was exhibited by the lack of proper structures when it comes to disaster management and the reliance of the county government on the climate change committee structures to disseminate the information. Then at the local level, where we have the local government officers, you find that they are excluded. They do not get this information from the national government, so there's a lapse in how this information is coordinated and relayed to the community. There's also a communication gap in the sense that the manner in which the information is disseminated. So sometimes it's done on radio or on TVs or through SMS, and you find that it does not reach a wider population. Weak infrastructure and preparedness of the local government is also another category of barrier, because this county government has not been able to allocate, number one, the resources, and also to put in the proper structure in place. And proper structure here meaning evacuation centers. So in this place, we do not have a designated evacuation center. What the community uses are schools or churches whenever flooding occurs. So when the messages come in, they're normally generic messages where they're told to move to higher ground. And remember, I said that this is a flat area. So they keep asking themselves, where is this higher ground where I'm supposed to move, or where is this evacuation center where I'm supposed to move? So that lack of infrastructure and preparedness by the local government limits the community to be able to act and avert any losses. Then there's the limited funding and resources, whereby the local government has not been able to set aside the funds that are needed to develop or co-develop an inclusive flood early warning system. And then, so they rely on majorly the county government to raise this money, or they also rely on NGOs, Red Cross to come in and give some money, which of course it's not sustainable. Then this inclusivity and social barrier is the last category, where we have talked about the exclusion of the vulnerable groups, including the elderly, women, and the persons with disabilities. So based on those findings, what are some of the recommendations that we can give? And number one, it is very important for the government and the producers of these forecasts to be able to co-design these early warning messages together with the community, and then now contextualize them to the local context. So it is not a matter of telling people that move to higher ground, yet there's no higher ground there. Then secondly, the community needs to be strengthened when it comes to preparedness, to disaster preparedness. And this should be done through regular training. Evacuation routes need to be mapped and planning done, so that they know that whenever we're anticipating we're going to have flooding in the next 2 to 3 weeks, then this is the routes that they're supposed to follow. And also they need to have a local disaster committee in place, because we found out that this was entirely lacking. Then there's need to improve the flood early warning systems. And this is by enhancing now coordination among institutions. So because there's also a bit of that fragmented coordination, where you find that the local government is doing its thing, the national government is also working on the other side. There are some NGOs who are coming in to help the local community. So you find that at the end of the day, there's going to be a bit of duplication in how the coordination and giving out help to this community is done. So we need to strengthen the monitoring systems and also the data. Data is not adequate, because you find that sometimes when this information is relayed, by the time it gets to the people, it is a bit late. So there's need to improve how data is collected and how data is shared. And then finally is to use the principle or the approach of gender equality and social inclusion when it comes to disaster planning and communication, because we've seen that when we exclude the vulnerable people, then what do we mean? Or when we exclude the last mile communities, what does that mean? It means that this warning that has been given is not going to be actionable. So at the end of the day, we find that this early warning is going to fail, because we did not take into consideration this aspect of inclusivity. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge GDPC for funding this study. I would also like to acknowledge the community and all the other stakeholders who participated in this research. Thank you, Vlad. Back to you.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, another very interesting and insightful study, and I think it touches upon like many different aspects of what makes early warning effective, right? Like coordination between different stakeholders and like governance structures, decision making then goes into people's kind of decisions to evacuate and act on early warnings. So yeah, so if you're interested to dive deeper in Linda's paper, I dropped a link in the chat, so yeah, feel free to read the full paper if you're interested. And next, I would like to invite Charles Chunga from Zuzu University in Malawi to share his findings from the research that he did in Malawi, studying kind of early action response to Cyclone Freddy flood early warnings in the context of Cyclone Freddy, which was the longest lasting tropical cyclone ever recorded in global history. Charles, the floor is yours. You're muted, so if you can unmute yourself, because we don't hear you.
Oh, sorry, Brad.
No worries. No, all good.
Thank you. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, you're good to go.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to acknowledge GDPC for the support they gave us to conduct this study, and also now for this opportunity to share our work. I'll go straight into it. So I'd like to begin by asking you to imagine something. So imagine that you're a farmer in Makuila, a flood-prone community in southern Malawi. You hear an announcement of a megaphone that heavy rainfall is expected tomorrow. You know that flooding is possible. Your livestock is tied outside, you have no money for transport, and the nearest evacuation center is kilometers away. Do you leave immediately or do you wait? So this dilemma captures the gap between a warning and an action. So today I'm going to present what helps households to take an action and also what prevents them from doing so. So let me briefly introduce the context of the study. Now, this study was conducted in Makuila, Chikwawa district, one of Malawi's most flood-prone districts. So Malawi is this country in the red circle there. In 2023, Malawi experienced the devastating impact of Cyclone Freddy, where hundreds of lives were lost and even hundreds of thousands were displaced. In Makuila, which is highly susceptible to flood, and it is characterized by limited economic devastation, was also highly impacted. This raises the question, we have, over the past years, there has been increased investment in flood warnings, there have been increased investment in warning systems and there has been increasing investment in warning systems. However, over the past years, flood impacts remain severe. So to find the answers for this, we collected evidence from 373 households, and we also conducted key informant interview and focus group discussion. Our findings revealed an interesting pattern. We found that most households received warnings. However, only a few managed to take early action. Nearly 79% of those that we managed to interview reported that they had received an warning. However, only 40% managed to take any form of reaction. Even fewer managed to evacuate before the disaster and to take protective actions. So some of the forms of actions that were taken, people evacuated before the disaster, and some others reinforced their houses using local available materials such as sandbags, wood, and even others managed to secure protective items. As one participant explained here, that they managed to build flood barriers around their houses, and in the end, they reduced the damage they had experienced. This shows that communities were willing to participate, were willing to take action. They were not passive. However, their ability to take this action differed considerably. So now the question was, what made these differences? Why did some households acted and others didn't? Our findings show that households faced different important barriers. First, the warning arrived too late. People reported that the warning that they had received arrived just the day before the impact itself. This was particularly concerning, considering that the warning was first forecast. The flood was first forecast 8 days before the disaster. However, many people are reported to have received this warning just a day before the disaster. Another reason why people didn't act was low risk perception. Due to past experiences, they had not experienced such severe flooding, so they did not expect that they would be affected with this flooding. Also, another issue that caused this low risk perception was that the warning that they had received was that there's going to be prolonged rainfall. And to them, the flood that came was a surprise to them. They did not interpret the prolonged rainfall as it resulting into flooding. They only see it as rain. Another issue was limited resources, be it financial or material. These ones also prevented people from acting early. There was also limited access to safe evacuation center. Makuila is an area of about 63 kilometers squares. However, there is only one evacuation center, an established evacuation center that people need to go, and to some, they cannot reach it using their own resources. And finally, there was also delayed support evacuation center. One of the issues people that were afraid of to escape to these evacuation centers was that how are they going to sustain themselves there, since economic opportunities are limited in these centers. So they actually resolve into staying at home where they can find means to fund their food and supplies. So since these evacuation centers did not have the resources to support them, they opted to wait until the disaster came. On the other hand, there are also factors that made people that encouraged people to act. This includes financial resources. Those who had the financial resources were more likely to act. Even more, those who had previous training in preparedness, they're also likely to act. And in communities where there was strong coordination, community engagement, people in those communities were even more so likely to act. And finally, choosing low-cost protective actions, such as using sandbags or just putting stones. Those who managed to take those actions managed to take protective actions. Meanwhile, those that required or needed the actions that would involve money or finances failed to act. The key message, as we can see here, is that information alone was not enough for household to respond. They needed to have their ability. They needed to have their ability to respond. So this brings us to actually what actually causes this gap between a warning and an action. So from our study, we suggested elements that need to come together for people to act, to take action when they receive an warning. First, the warning must be timely and clearly communicated. As evidence from Makuila, we see that warning that people received, it was that there was going to be prolonged rainfall, and it was left to their interpretation, and some did not interpret that the warning is going to result into flooding. They only prepared for the rain. However, it is the flood that devastated them. Secondly, households need to have the capacity to act, whether it is financial resources, material, equipment, or knowledge of protective actions to take. Then thirdly, there's need to have well-resourced evacuation centers. It is hard to escape when you have nowhere to go. However, if there is an accessible, a well-resourced evacuation center, people will be willing to take those actions. And finally, community coordination. So in community coordination, as evidence from Makuela, in areas where there is community coordination, there was also high level of community engagement. And this impacted into community and resource mobilization. So this resource mobilization also influenced other people to act. Just from seeing other people acting, the majority or other people or other households were also willing to take their actions and act. So this perhaps is one of the most important elements in our findings. That warning alone did not result into action, but there need to be some other factors to come into place, as seen from here. And some of the factors that can close this gap are the ones that I've just mentioned here. So this gap cannot be closed by one institution. There needs to be partnership between different institutions. In Makuela, different partners played a role and helped in improving disaster preparedness of the community. Firstly, the government, the district council, and department within the government coordinated area warnings. Traditional leaders and local disaster committees, such as area disaster risk management committee and village civil protection committees, served as a bridge or as a link between communities and formal institutions. These ones also played a major role in mobilizing households to prepare and evacuate. Thirdly, this one needs to be mentioned, Malawi Red Cross Society, through a co-item project. They played a major role in strengthening local disaster committees through training, equipment, and ongoing technical support. Evidence from the study showed that in areas where these committees were active, there was also high levels of return in terms of action taken. And finally, humanitarian partners, such as the WFP, Malawi Red Cross Service, and others supported evacuation centers with food, relief supplies, and other essential assistance. While this support may have come late, it played a major role as it left an expectation to the communities, and they were willing to go. This expectation alone and hope made other people to evacuate before the disaster came. So what do these findings actually mean in terms of policy and practical implication? First, warning messages should clearly communicate the expected hazards, the likely impact, and also the protective action that must be taken. This can be improved by using interactive communication channels, such as door-to-door and community meetings. Such communication channels give opportunity for the community and those with the, in terms of Makuela, there are some other people with low levels of literacy. So using this type of communication channel, it gives them opportunity to ask questions, and wherever they don't understand, they can be able to get answers. And finally, to reduce bureaucratic delays. The message came with this, that there's going to be flood, that there's going to be a cyclone. However, people received the message 1 day before. One of the reasons this happened is because there was a bureaucratic delay between the government and the forecasting institutions, such as the disaster management, which issued the warning, and this warning traveled to local district councils, and then at a community level, it also had to go through these local disaster committees, then to the people. The only method that this method came early was through local traditional broadcasting methods, such as radios, which many people did not find themselves using. In case of Makuela, they relied on village committees to pass this information. So bureaucratic details need to be introduced, the link between the government itself and village committees. Secondly, there is need to strengthen local disaster committees. Local disaster committees play a crucial role as a link between committees, between communities and formal institutions. These ones mobilize communities to take actions, and also they improve the early warning dissemination. And thirdly, there is need to invest in evacuation infrastructure. And in this regard, there's need to establish well-resourced evacuation centers, additional ones, because the only evacuation center in Savala area in Mokwile is not enough to save all the people in the area. And in cases where complementary centers have been need to be open, these ones need to be open prior to the impact of the flood, just to make sure that people can be able to be accommodated at these centers before the impact itself. And also there is need to ensure timely support at these evacuation centers before the impact itself has come. Fourthly, disaster preparedness training. Disaster preparedness training usually include community leaders and those who are in committee. It mostly exclude the general community. This acted as a barrier since since those who receive the training are expected to pass this information to the community, and in some cases, the transfer of knowledge can take some time. So there's need to make sure that the community is safe and the whole community in general do also take part in disaster preparedness training, so that they can know themselves the most protective, the most effective protective measures to take, and also even other protective measures that do not require finances. And finally, anticipated assistance should be targeted towards the most vulnerable, those ones that are not able to overcome financial barriers. So there's need to target them with financial assistance wherever possible. So these are the practical actions that can help transform warnings into timely protective actions. Thank you everyone for your attention. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles. Again, like very interesting study, and especially kind of your findings around the importance of resourcing early action, because sometimes even people, even if communities are willing to take action, they may not have resources to do so if evacuation centers like so
Brian.
far away, or yeah, they don't have equipment or materials to do that. And with that, I would like to open it to questions from the audience. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it, or you can just post it in the Q&A section. And I see that we already have one question from Edith on action prioritization. So I'm going to read the question, and then Charles, Linda, Olumuyiwa, if you would like to respond to it, feel free to raise your hand and respond. So thank you for the presentations. They were very informative. I would like to know whether a specific methodology was used in the studies to identify and prioritize the actions that could be implemented at the national and local levels according to different types of alerts. I know Charles, Olumuyiwa, Linda, who wants to take this question. Basically, yeah, if you had any methodology aspects that help to identify and prioritize relevant actions. Olumuyiwa, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Vlad. And it's interesting to see this is coming through in this feedback. And in our work, we did not do any kind of prioritization, but I think it's something to also look at. Yeah, because you would, of course, have a suite of possible actions at various levels, from communities to other stakeholders at higher levels. So rather than say we did this, I think it's something we can also consider in taking our work forward. So that while there is a long list or short list of responses, we could also see prioritization framework, given the fact that resources are always limited, considering time, considering maybe locations in remote communities and things like that. So I take it as a suggestion for in taking the work forward from my hand. Yeah, thanks. Back to you.
Linda, Charles, do you have anything else to add on this question? I'll take it as a no. I mean, from myself, on this question, I just, I would like to mention that, yeah, maybe it's also really important to, when it comes to like early warnings and alert, to make sure that, the action.
I'm sorry, Fred.
Hey, sorry, what was that?
Oh, I did not hear the question itself. I think I had a communication breakdown just a moment ago.
Yeah, basically the question was whether in your study there was any specific methodology used to identify and prioritize actions that could be implemented at national and local levels according to different types of hazards and different alerts.
So in our case, we went further to understand some of the action and the impact that they had. So we asked communities what action they had and the impact that those actions came with, those actions produced. It was unfortunate to find that most of the action that people take due to lack of financials was limited, and it had minimal impact, such as the stones that they built using sandbags to act as water flood barriers. Due to the severe impact of the flood, it turned out that those actions did not have significant influence as to the outcome of the flood itself.
Thanks, Charles.
So just to add, in this case, so there's need to invest more into understanding what actions these people can take in cases such as Makuila, where severe impact can also even undermine actions taken at the household level.
And I think like the last thing that I can add, it's also important for actions to be contextually relevant, because there were a few examples. I think an example that stuck with me from Linda's research was when, one of the recommendations for action was to move to evacuate to higher grounds in a community where there was no higher grounds anywhere near that community. Or there was another example from one of their studies that were presented on previous sessions when advice on how to secure your agricultural goods was sent to a community that didn't where there was no farmers in that community, to also make sure when actions that are identified and advice that shared with communities really contextually relevant and responds to their actual needs and their realities.
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Linda.
Thank you. So thank you for that question which has been raised. And in our study, we also didn't use any methods to prioritize these actions. But what we did in the focus group discussion was to ask the community what they thought was their priority need, what needs to be done by the county government to be able to help them. And on top of their list was that aspect of evacuation centers, because we do not have any designated evacuation center in that area. So they either go to churches or to schools. And of course, when the schools are in session, they're not going to be allowed. They'll be chased out. And then sometimes now they rely on their neighbors. So for the neighbors whose households are not flooded, their homesteads are not flooded, they'll take in their neighbors depending on the space that they have. So for them, based on their most pressing need, they felt that these evacuation centers is what needs to be prioritized. And then the second thing is how now this early warning information was getting to them. So there was a delay. We have a county officer called the chief. So this chief is the person who is primarily in contact with the community. But it turns out the chief also does not have information on the forecasted floods and all that. So when it comes to coordination of the information, that was also another thing that came up. So investing in proper structures and now the committees so that this information gets to them on time. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And then the next question, very interesting one from Helen. So she's asking, can the presenters maybe also briefly mention what they found particularly interesting or valuable from the presentations of the other two presenters? So if each of you, Linda, Charles, and Alamuyiwa, can briefly mention what you found particularly interesting from the other two presentations that we just heard. Yeah. Alamuyiwa, if you would like to go first, since you went first last time.
Thanks sounds like a class exercise. Okay, that's good. Let me speak to Charles' presentation about. I think what's most striking for me is the fact that when people get the information, they get the warning, but they have little or no power to take the right actions. So it speaks to the issue of resources, which resonates with something we also found in our study where people know about the heat, but because they need to make a living, they wouldn't care taking cover. They just have to go out. So they say it's the heat of the pocket is stronger than heat of the sun. So I think that resonates, and that was quite striking for me. For Linda, it's unflawed, and I think it's quite interesting to see the situation in rural settings in Kenya. Though I would have loved to see how the kind of warning might also be done in urban slum settings, maybe somewhere like Kibera, Mutare, and other places, to see if how the warnings would also help to prevent flooding, or how maybe they would work better. So those are just my quick comments to my co-presenters, and I think there are issues that resonate across the three projects. Yeah, I think I've done the class exercise very well.
A+. And Alamuyiwa, like quick favor for you. There is a really long and interesting question from Jessica in the Q&A feature of the webinar. So if you can read the question, and then we'll get back to you if you can respond to this question after we hear from Linda and Charles. So just so you have like a minute to
I'm trying to
read it.
The questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll get back to you in a few minutes. Thank you. Linda, Charles, who wants to go next? Yeah, with your class exercise of summary, your co-presenters' presentations.
I can go next. So for me, I found Muyiwa's presentation quite insightful, because currently I'm doing a study on vulnerability of pastoralist community when it comes to drought and extreme heat. So that aspect is talking about the heat index, I think, whereby they were able to quantify and tell the community that if the temperature is this, then it means that we classify this as extreme heat. So I found it interesting, and also when he shared about the respondents who say that now when they take water or they don't work longer under the sun, then they're able now to cope with the heat stress. So that was quite interesting because sometimes the community goes through these phenomenons or the climate disasters, but they're not aware about what it is until you point it out to them. So sometimes the coping mechanisms does not have to be so complicated. It has to do with that bit of awareness. And then for Charles, it was interesting to see that we have similar results because at the end of the day, as much as the research was done in different countries, but we find that our local communities are grappling with the same problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Charles, do you have any reflections or thoughts on your co-presenters' studies?
Yes, I see that most of these issues or barriers that these communities face, last mile communities, the underlying factors are most common. Specifically, it is used to do with the ability, the opportunities, and the capacity to act. As understood from Linda, found that the issue to do with evacuation centers, designated evacuation centers, it resonates with my study, as in Mokwila, there's only one evacuation center. And in some cases, they use churches, but however, these churches, they only open when the disaster has come, and the people that have been affected, they act like as an escape route. So one cannot take action before the disaster because you will not be welcomed in these places. As for my friend, I presented on the heat wave. I find it resonating with money in terms of he mentioned something to do with back messaging or weighing, and also about weighing opportunities or weighing factors, whether to act or not to act in cases where he has to balance to find a living. So communities, small communities, we always have to weigh factors to escape or to find a living. In most cases, it is finding a living that comes first, and escaping, they will leave it to chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. So the next Alamuyiwa, I don't know if you had a chance to read, and it says Jessica question, if you have any reflections on that. But to summarize for our audience, basically, Jessica is asking, how can you tailor or design heat early action communication strategies to more dynamic populations, not like people who live kind of in the same place all the time, but it gives an example of, for example, communication and bus stops in urban centers in Pakistan. So basically, yeah, how can we design those warning communication channels and methods to serve, populations that are constantly moving? I don't know, Alamuyiwa, if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay, thanks, Vlad, and thanks, Jessica, for the comments. Quite interesting to see the need to address these dynamic settings, particularly in the context of transport. I'm not sure if I got the actual geographical setting, because I understand, for example, if we're dealing with heat, it's tied to particular geographies where the temperature conditions exist and the humidity conditions exist, and you can get a level of heat exposure and all that. But I assume, and I understand the need to pay attention to transport sectors in terms of heat. So what I've seen that might be close to solutions I've seen innovations emerging is the need is around the use of digital tools, apps that helps people to find a way, particularly when it's hot. I think I've seen I read about such in one of the German cities, particularly to help vulnerable groups or vulnerable people. You have a lot of elderly, to avoid routes that could be hot during the heat waves. So, for example, and this is based on machine learning, routes that no trees, route that doesn't have trees, that are just pavements, that don't have any form of shading, based on the models, would be hotter at certain temperatures. So maybe before you set out and you get information about, you check the app and you're able to see the conditions, you might be able to avoid those routes because you want to navigate through shaded spaces, cooler spaces. So I think digitization could help, but I'm not sure how that aligns perfectly with the geographical context that Jessica seemed to refer to. But that's one of the areas of innovation in the transport sector in terms of addressing it. Thanks.
Thanks.
Over to you, Vlad. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Any any other questions from the audience? Again, feel free to unmute and ask your question out loud, or just post it in the Q&A section. Okay, we don't have any questions from the audience. I'll take advantage of my role as a moderator and I'm gonna ask a question to all three of our presenters to kind of maybe pinpoint, like, again, like it relates to this gap between warning and action, across all three of your studies. A lot of people, they received the warning, but they still didn't act, or they acted in only kind of limited ways. And if you had to name one single biggest reason why this gap between, warning and action persisted in your context, what would it be? The money and resources, trust, infrastructure, or like the content of the alert message itself. Yeah, if you can pinpoint kind of one biggest contributor to this like gap between warning and action, and also if you have any solutions or ideas of how this gap can be addressed to kind of eliminate or minimize it. And again, I would like to ask all three of our presenters based on their studies.
Okay, I'll start.
Yes,
okay,
Charles, go ahead,
Charles. Yeah, Charles, go ahead.
All right. Based on the study in Makuila, we saw that there are many factors that that prevented people from acting. I would say the biggest one was a lack of capacity to act in terms of finances and equipment, and also knowing the protective measures to take. So I would say the biggest one is lack of capacity in terms of opportunity, in terms of financial resources, material resources, equipment, and the know-how, the knowledge of what protective measures that can be taken. Because in understanding that financial resources are needed, there are also other methods. So there are also other protective measures that can be taken using locally available materials. But due to lack of knowledge of these protective actions, people were unable to take actions. It is only those who had previous training on disaster preparedness that were able to take those actions. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically say like they emphasize the importance of training and drills and kind of simulation exercises to make sure that people know what to do when like a hazard is coming in.
Exactly. This can be helped by community engagement in preparedness trainings.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. Alamuyiwa, if you want to go next.
I would think it's between warning and action, knowledge, but it's not primarily knowledge. I would think it's resources. Of course, resources is a bunch, so it includes knowledge, it includes services, it includes money. So it's a bunch. We need more resources. These are places that are underserved. Informal settlements don't have all the services you have in other places. So when you ask people to hydrate and they have to pay for water, or they don't even have potable water, when they need to cool and there is no electricity. So we need more resources, of course, which comes with a bundle of knowledge in order to stimulate the right actions, to provide a good basis for the right actions based on the existing knowledge and what's been disseminated. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, ultimately, often it comes down to like infrastructure and like structural issues that may prevent people from acting on those alerts. I think, Linda, if you want to add something.
Yes, please. From my research, what we found out, I would say that aspect of co-development of these warnings with the community is very important so that we move away from this top-down structure. When we co-develop these systems or this information with the community, then it means that we are also building trust of the community in these forecasts. So by the time that they're receiving this forecast, it's going to result into timely action because the people now believe or have greater trust in the source of this forecast because they've been involved in the process, and also it has been contextualized into their local community. So it is not about giving out generic information that can be given to any part of Kenya, but now fitting this particular community so that we're able to address their needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And we have only 2 minutes remaining, but there was last minute question that came in from Gregory on if anyone can have any thoughts or reflections on the balance in DRR budget, disaster risk reduction budget, balance between early warning systems and message like delivery, dissemination versus identifying and delivering practical supportive action. So basically, how to balance what to prioritize in the budget, like the actual kind of warning dissemination and delivery, or actually, the support, more like tangible support to people to act on those early warning messages. If we only have 1 minute, so if any of you would like to take it.
Maybe I can start.
Yeah. Go ahead, Linda.
I would say maybe where we need to put more emphasis is on putting more resources when it comes to the forecast, the timely information, because here we are going to be able to give support to the community to be able to act and avoid the adverse impacts of flood, say, on their livelihood. So it's going to be cheaper in the long run to help the community to act on time rather than waiting for the disaster to occur. And then that's when we come in to support the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And I also want to add that this funding for early action support doesn't have to come. Ideally, it should not come from like DRR budget, and there are other financing mechanisms that should kind of play a role. For example, insurance, parametric insurance schemes. Now, I know there are like some pilots are being done right now, when like people can get money, the organizations can get funding from insurance based on expected incomes. Or for example, there are examples when it comes from development budget where new schools are being built and they also serve as like shelters, during an emergency. So ideally, there are kind of other alternative ways to find this early action infrastructure and early action support other than DRR budgets. Again, thank you so much. We're at a time. I would like to thank all our presenters and also all our attendees for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed the session, and stay tuned for a follow-up email from us GDPC with kind of summary, with the recording and summary of key findings from the presentations. Again, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.